I am letting them all in. Good afternoon, everyone. We are going to get started here in just a moment. As all of you are coming in, again, thank you so much for joining us. We'll get started here in probably about 30 seconds or so. Thanks again. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Axelson's kickoff webinar for our Winter-Spring 2025 workshop series. I am Adam Joyce, the Interim Director of the Axelson Center here at North Park University in Chicago. A bit about Axelson for those of you who are not familiar. We are part of the School of Business and Nonprofit Management at North Park, and we are a capacity building professional development organization, and our programs include workshops, webinars, awards for nonprofit managerial excellence, custom trainings, a boot camp for new nonprofit CEOs, and so much more. We work with nonprofit leaders, especially in the Chicagoland area. So in today's session, Dr. Roseanne Mirabella will kick off our spring workshop series by discussing the major issues impacting nonprofit organizations during these challenging times. But before I hand it over to her, I want to highlight a few announcements and upcoming programming that we have. First, I want to highlight that Axelson is currently searching for a new director. So our longtime director, Dr. Pierre Rogers, retired this previous year, and the job is posted and available for you to apply. So if you are interested, please scan here to learn a little bit more about it, or please feel free to reach out to me to learn more or talk about the position itself. Next, the Alfred Axelson Award for Nonprofit Managerial Excellence application is also open for 2025. So this was established in 2001, and it's award for nonprofit managerial excellence. And winners get a 10K cash prize, which is presented at our annual fall conference. If you want to learn more about it and possibly apply, please feel free to scan the QR code here. Next, I am extremely excited to invite all of you to save the date for an upcoming spring film showing that Axelson is doing in partnership with the Evolve Giving Group. This is for the documentary Uncharitable. And for those of you who aren't familiar, Uncharitable is a documentary by Dan Pallotta. It's about charity, giving, and how the nonprofit sector can sustainably and more directly address human suffering. So this is going to be on April 24th at Steppenwolf Theater. It is going to be a day of food, conversation. We're going to have panelists who are actually in the documentary itself to talk a little bit more. So please keep your eye out. Tickets will be going on sale very, very soon. We just wanted to let you all know about this. And then next, a little bit more about our structure for the session today. So Dr. Mirabella is going to give her talk, Community Leadership in Challenging Times, for about 40 minutes. Then after she answers a couple audience questions, we are going to provide previews of our first 4 workshops in our spring workshop series. So these are about 2-minute videos where presenters will share some about themselves, the content of the workshop, the takeaways that you'll have. And this is a chance for you to learn more and also sign up for these great sessions as well. And just finally, so for Q&A during this session, we have the Q&A function enabled below. So please drop them in there. You can also vote on questions that you want Dr. Mirabella to pick up at the end, but just put them there and then we will pick them up when she's done with her talk. So With all of that said, it is my pleasure to introduce you to Dr. Roseanne Mirabella. Dr. Mirabella is an associate professor in the Department of Criminal Justice and Public Affairs at Kean University. She's also served as professor in the Department of Political Science and Public Affairs and executive director of the Center for Community Research and Engagement at Seton Hall University. She has co-edited numerous books on nonprofit organizations and social change, and is a past president of the Association for Research on Nonprofit Organizations and Voluntary Action. And with that, Dr. Mirabella, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for inviting me to be the kickoff speaker for today and for your sessions coming up. I wanted to talk to you, and I put together a conversation with you about what it is to lead your organizations during this particular time. And as you all know, in this particular moment of time, we are being challenged by a lot of things that are coming at us daily. And I'm sure we could just open you all up and just have a conversation with you about that. But in terms of the overview of what I'd like to speak with you about, I've divided the talk up into 4 areas. I want to talk to you about management and leadership. Which one should we be focused on right now? The importance of disaster response and recovery. As you know, every day when we open the newspaper seems to be another disaster hitting some part of the country or the world. The impact of social media on civil society. And this in particular is talking about, and some of you may have said this yourselves out loud in the past couple of weeks, that there used to be a time when we had 3 major news networks and 2 or 5 major newspapers, but now social media has kind of really disrupted how we get our information. And so what that means for civil society, and that is the space in which you do your work. And then finally, the external threats to your organizations and other organizations because of anti-woke laws and policies. I teach nonprofit management here at Kean and did so at Seton Hall before that. And I know that the Axelson Center does tremendous education, Axelson Center, does tremendous education in this regard as well. And I'm not going to dwell on my research, but I do want to focus a little bit about what I've been thinking about in terms of how we educate students. And I think it's important for you as nonprofit leaders to really think about how we've been doing this in the past 40 years as the field has grown, and maybe what we and you might want to think about changing as we look at our approach to managing organizations. So we do a very good job, and my research bears this out. We do a really good job on teaching students how to run organizations. We have a very large focus on management. We do a much less of a good job on teaching students how to become agents of social transformation. I'm going to just show you one chart that's going to really bring that home to you. So there's kind of 3 ways of looking at your work as nonprofit leaders. You have the inside work that you do running your organization. You have the work that you do outside your organization, fundraising, public policy work, work in philanthropy, marketing, and PR, and then sort of those boundary spanning things. And sometimes as nonprofit educators, we spend a lot of time teaching our students how to run their internal organizations, how to do financial management, how to do board development, how to do human resource management. We spend much less time on teaching them around issues regarding advocacy for the communities that they work with, engaging in public policy efforts, doing community organizing, and other aspects like that. In fact, you could see from this chart that the number of internal management skills courses has been on the rise over the past few years. And so I just wanted to talk to you a few minutes about the importance of social transformation in your organization. So nonprofit organizations have a tremendously critical role in running their organizations, but in supporting democracy. So you are all participating in and taking part in the civic square. And the social change and process is really important in this regard because we have to be able to translate the research that we have into the communities that you're serving. So by employing radical democratic processes in your organizations and in your communities will encourage sort of a revitalization as a civic space, and our civic spaces have been shrinking. And one of the reasons our civic spaces have been shrinking, some of you might be familiar with the concept by Putnam of bowling alone, that in the past 20 or 30 years, people have been joining less and bowling alone more, which means we've taken to our homes, we're taken to our private spaces, and we're not as involved in civics as much as we have. In addition to this, in addition to trying to educate our students for participation in the polity and for you to educate your communities for participation in the policy, I really want to talk about rooting out racism. So Lopez and Littleton give us an example of how we have to think about racism in terms of how public policies and public laws have been created. And it's important for us to think about this in this regard. There's a lot of research right now who shows how our public administration and our nonprofit management organizations are not colorblind, that there is a whiteness in the way that we administer our organizations, and that there is indeed institutional racism in the work that we do. And I think that some of you probably see this, probably some of you probably know this. Some of you, I can't see who you are, but some of you might run organizations that are predominantly run by people of color. And the research bears out that organizations run by people of color have far less access to philanthropic funds than organizations run by people who are white. Organizations run by men have far more access to fundraising than organizations that are run by women. And so we have to root out this racism and root out this sexism that goes on. And so I want to just bear with me for a minute, if you would. And I want to just tell you how we're doing this at Kane University. And maybe this can sort of get you thinking about how your own nonprofit organizations can do this in your communities as well. So I'm going to show you a quick video, if you would, of work that we've been doing in my classrooms with community practitioners. And maybe if some of you are interested, I'd be really happy to work with you on developing these kinds of partnerships with your university, with the Axelson Center and others as well. So let's see if this is going to work. Did it? So can you just tell me, did it switch to the video, or are you still seeing my PowerPoint?
We're just seeing your PowerPoint right now.
Okay, so I know what I have to do. I have to escape from here. I have to actually, okay. Sorry. I have to stop the share. And now I have to share. Now, can you see it? Okay.
Roseanne, your video isn't working currently right now.
It's not working?
Yeah, there's no sound.
Oh, what do I do? My sound is on. Oh, well, I don't know what to do, but okay. I'll go back to my PowerPoints. I'll stop this share. I don't know why it's not working. Sorry about that, guys. I can mail it to you. Oh, you know why it's not working? Wait, I have to cancel this. Stop this share. Okay, I'll try one more time. If it doesn't work, just forget it.
Yeah, you have to also share sound.
Oh. And how do I do that? Sorry.
Yeah,
that didn't work.
We can provide this with attendees after the session. We can.
Okay, all right. I'll stop that share. Go back over here. Sorry, folks. Okay. Anyway, I will tell you about what the video would have said. We are doing something that is very unique at Kane University. And I actually started this at Seton Hall when I was there previously. What universities and communities need to do, and this is one of the things that we're doing at Kane, is we need to begin working more collaboratively and in partnership than we have been doing. Universities are kind of famous for going out to the communities and saying, we actually know what your issues are, and we're going to tell you how to fix them, and we're going to bring in this cadre of people to do that. At Kane and in the work that I'm doing, I've actually stood it on its head, and I've brought in community practitioners. These are what we would call credible messengers, people who are doing the work on the ground. And we've said to them, tell us about your work, tell us about what you're doing, and tell us about how we can help you move your organization forward. It's really quite a different understanding of community-based work, rather than universities being the ones with all of the knowledge and expertise. The community practitioners are seen as equal in this partnership. In fact, so much so that the community practitioners actually kind of take over the classroom with the students in terms of forming the work and moving it forward. So I will share that with you and really ask all of you if you would like to be partners with us with that, because I'm sure there's the Axelson Center would be interested in doing this kind of work as well. So with that, I'm going to move to the next aspect of the talk. And so, in addition to needing to become more involved with our community in an advocacy and social change notion, it's not surprising that we as nonprofit organizations really need to step up our work in terms of disaster response and recovery. Now, let me preface that by saying it's not that nonprofit organizations aren't already doing this work, because we have found since 2010, 2012, with the Hurricane Sandy, Superstorm Sandy, with Hurricane Katrina, with other kinds of, the recent fires in California, that the nonprofit organizations are the first ones on the ground. They're the first ones there to provide disaster recovery to communities. They're the first ones there to shore up the organizations. And then obviously we saw this during COVID. And so nonprofit organizations increasingly will be called upon to respond to these disasters, whether they be global climate change kind of disasters, or disasters that are healthcare. I mean, there might be a bird flu, hopefully not, disaster looming. And so nonprofit organizations really need to think about and be ready for how they're going to respond in this regard. So what I've prepared for you is sort of a way to think about this. So if we just stop and think about COVID, according to Tom Friedman from the New York Times, COVID created a new historical divide for nonprofit organizations. We need to think about life before COVID and life after COVID. And the reason for that is everything was thrown into disarray when COVID happened. And a lot of people were obviously not prepared for this to happen. And so we need to, our organizations and our organization theory is set up to prepare people to deal with the day-to-day usual things, and we're not really prepared for crisis management. So what happened as a result of COVID, when all of these things became very clear to us and we were faced with all of these lockdowns, the world was thrown into disarray. And so what happened as a result? Marginalized populations during COVID were the ones who were impacted the most. So the elderly were not only impacted the most because 8 and 10 of the deaths occurred among this population, they were also isolated during this time. And all of the work that they were doing in the community, whether they were going out and volunteering or taking care of their grandchildren or whatever, they were left unable to do that because of COVID. We obviously know that Blacks, African Americans, and Latinos were more likely to lose their jobs or have their hours cut, or were more likely to have to go to work and were exposed to the virus much more than other populations that were able to work remotely from home. We also know that women were disproportionately impacted by the COVID pandemic, and they were not only having to do remote work from home, but they were also having to homeschool their children. Women were also employed in occupations such as care aides, supermarket cashiers, nurses, respiratory therapists, where they were required to perform their work. They could not perform this work remotely. And finally, the LGBTQ, both elderly and youth population, were disproportionately impacted. Studies are coming out finding that they were disproportionately impacted by COVID. They were nearly one in 10 were unemployed. They were more likely to contract the virus due to their economic situation. The elderly LGBTQ population were much more isolated because they didn't have family, they didn't have community that they could turn to. And many LGBTQ folks were, particularly youth, were forced back into their homes. And oftentimes their homes were not safe places for them if their parents were not accepting of who they are. This was also true for women who were living in domestic violence kinds of situations. And so all of these marginalized populations during COVID, their lives became worse. And so this kind of puts a real picture on what was going on during COVID. So we kind of had two things happening at the same time. We had all of these folks who were anti-lockdown and anti-protesters who were really opposed to the government telling them what to do. And then at the same time, we had this Black Lives Matter protest going on, particularly after the George Floyd killing, where Black people were saying to us, this is how I've lived my whole life, not feeling safe when I leave the house. And so, what does this mean for you as nonprofit leaders? So, because of pandemics and natural disasters, we really have to change the way that we work in our organizations. We have to be ready with our staff, with training, and with our logistics to come out and be ready to address these crises when they occur. We know that there's an increased reliance on volunteers and nonprofit organizations. We have to be ready to provide mental health resources to our workers. We need to have personal protective equipment ready if that's the kind of environment that we're dealing with. And we have to have clear definitions of roles in place in order to reduce fatigue, because fatigue was very great in nonprofit organizations. So then what is the nonprofit role? Well, first of all, nonprofits, one of their roles is to raise awareness to disaster risk. You need to let your local folks know, your state folks know that you're out there, but we have to we have to let them know of the awareness. We also have to reduce disaster risk in our community as well as in our organizations, and we have to prepare for disasters. I'm sure some of you are already working on this with your local officials to be part of their disaster preparation. And we also need to think about long-term disaster recovery, because responding to disasters such as the one that just took place in California or the disaster that just took place in North Carolina is going to take years. So what is your strength? What do you bring as a nonprofit organization to this? Well, first of all, you bring local knowledge. You know your communities better than anybody else. The communities also trust you more than they trust others. So you have that connection. So you have that ability as a nonprofit organization during a disaster, during whether it's a biological disaster or a natural disaster, to respond to that. How do you do that? Through regional collaborations, to strengthen your community resilience, and to look at underlying vulnerabilities, which basically means to be ready. And so one thing I would ask you to all think about, if you haven't already, and I don't know if Axelson has run any kind of webinars in this regard, but do you have a disaster preparedness plan for your organization? And that would include preparing for the disaster before it happens, and then what happens after the disaster, and then how you recover and how you rebuild. And so nonprofits, as I said, have a great resilience and organizational capacity to respond to natural disasters. And communities have a great resilience to respond to natural disasters. And together, nonprofit organizations and the community can respond together to hurricanes, to pandemics, to fires, to what's going on in their community through a service and collaboration role. So the next part of my talk will focus on the threat to our nonprofit organizations and, quite frankly, to our democracy from what we in the field call deviant voluntary associations. And I'd like to talk about this in three different ways. I'd like to talk about this in terms of liberalism and nationalism. I'd like to talk about this in terms of populism and civil society, in terms of civil religion and partisanship, and the ultimate outcome of all of these, which is the closing of civic spaces. So let me just talk a little bit about liberalism and nationalism. So to take you back to your high school class where you took civic education, we talked about ours being a liberal democracy. And a liberal democracy is this notion that we are all free to live within our democracy, with the government stepping in to ease tensions between people who are pursuing their self-interests. Nationalism, on the other hand, is a different look at this. And nationalism is this notion that the the United States or other countries who sort of have this nationalist fervor going on, there's this sense that there's something greater than liberalism and self-interest. There's something around being being adherent to and being focused on us as Americans. And it kind of makes us think about who are the Americans. And if you look at some of the things that are happening right now, the 14th Amendment focus, which is to take away birthright citizenship to people who were born here, um, is this notion on nationalism, are they actually really part of our nation? So there's this tension now between these two isms, between liberalism and nationalism. There's also a tension between populism and civil society. So populism is this new way of looking at issues where we otherize people. So who have been otherized? Well, they're the people that I talked about during the COVID piece of this conversation. We otherize migrants. And so as a result, nonprofit organizations that serve migrants are similarly otherized. And they're similarly potentially in danger because they serve this population. So it's a populist narrative, and it portrays certain people as being true citizens of the nations and other people as not being true citizens of the nation. And some of this has a racial component to it, as we could all see, and some of it is based on this notion that those who were not born here or those who came here without documents are not wanted here, and those who serve them are in danger as a result because their organizations are in danger. We then have this also notion of civil religion and partisanship. So you may see this in the communities where you serve, where there is this increasing focus, which goes along with nationalism and populism, to see the United States as a Christian nation. It goes back to the founding of the nation in the late 1800s, where the Christian people who came here from Europe wanted to build a Christian nation and wanted to have the values of the Christian nation um, be part and parcel and central to. But we now see this this religion entering into conversations around education, entering into conversations around healthcare, entering into conversations around economic development, because there's a fervor for the Christian right in this space to push aside the secular people on the left. And it's become very partisan in that regard. And so there's some conversation about thinking about what the values are, what the values of civil society are, and how they can be separated out from this notion that it's Christian values that should lead. And these deviant voluntary associations right now that are pretty prominent in these spaces really lend themselves to trying to push the Christian values and the Christian way of thinking. So it lends itself to Tennessee passed a law that the Ten Commandments have to hang on each in the classroom, in every classroom, whether it's a secular classroom or religious classroom. Now, some people could say that those values are, good values, but they also have a value that's different from other people. And so the Constitution does speak about separation of church and state. And then finally, with all of this, and this is really important for those of us who work in the nonprofit space, As we've seen a rise of authoritarianism around the globe, as we've seen an increase in democratic backsliding, as we're seeing it in our own country right now with the tensions between the three branches of government and who has the power within the Constitution to do what, we're seeing a concomitant rise in the closing of civic spaces. So, what does that mean? What does it mean for civic spaces to close? Well, USAID, as a case in point, and we've seen in the news in the past week where the cutback, quite frankly, the closure of USAID, the taking down the name on the building, the covering up the signage with plastic, covering up signage with tape, not only means that USAID is no longer going to be able to do its work, but it also means that those civic spaces, the hospitals, the foster care agencies, the classrooms that were run with money from the USAID will now be closed in all of these regions of the world that used to receive money from USAID. And as those civic spaces close, authoritarianism is kind of happy. Authoritarian rulers are really happy because they have no one who pushes back against them and no one who counterbalances them. And this is really important for us to think about and acknowledge. And one of the big ways in which this happens is the impact of social media on the closing of civil spaces. And so the threats to our civil society from social media are somewhat threefold. First of all, it distorts our lived experiences. What we post on the internet and what others post on the internet is not really our lives. It's not how we it's not how we exist as human beings, but we become memes. We become distorted in this way, and we reproduce and we multiply and share our beings through these online platforms, but it threatens us because it becomes a hyper reality. It's not real. Secondly, liquid modernity encompasses limitations on the authentic public sphere, which results from the rapid change in online apps and platforms, which render the everyday citizen unable to engage with and challenge the elite status quo. We are powerless against X because X is run by one individual who has a tremendous amount of power and a tremendous amount of wealth. And so we're unable to engage with and, quite frankly, challenge that elite status quo because our modernity has become so liquefied. And then finally, it fabricates the people. And it does it in this way because it decides who's going to be the people and who are not going to be allowed to be the people. And because we already said that we erase and we deperson people, actually existing individuals, whether they be migrants or LGBTQ people, saying there's only two sexes, male and female, now says that there are no real transgender people. We've depersoned these people, and social media has been one of the ways in which this happens. And so, what are the ways that we can combat these threats, and how you, as nonprofit leaders, can combat these threats? So, I know that you need to use social media for fundraising, for public relations, but we also have to be skeptical of social media, and we must recognize that authentic collective organizing has to go beyond online discourse to be effective. And we actually have to reclaim actually existing civic spheres in our communities. So how do we do that? So we need to hold actual events where people show up. I know that people like Zoom now. It's easier to do Zoom, but there have been studies done that show that there's more civic community building if it's done in real spaces as opposed to virtual spaces. We also have to bring together individuals to restructure the civic sphere and to ground that in facts and truth. Because what civic spaces closure has done is it's really eliminated what is true from what is false so that we no longer know what is true. You find a meme, you spread the meme around, and before you know it, Haitian people are eating dogs and cats in Springfield, Ohio, which we know wasn't true. But no matter how much we tried to advance that, we couldn't advance that truthful notion because because of the distortion of our lived experience through social media. And so nonprofit organizations have to work in this regard. And then the last thing that I'm going to talk about in the last few minutes that I have are the existential threats to all of you in your organizations, particularly from the anti-woke laws and policies that are now coming down from the federal government. And I took a look at the ACLU and what they're talking about. This is very true for me in the academic world, and it's quite frankly been something that we have been dealing with for a number of years now. It's not just based upon who's president, but for a number of years, academic discussions of race and sex-based discrimination have been completely censored in some parts of this country. You're in Chicago, so I don't think it's impacted you as much as it's impacted people who live in Florida or people who live in Texas, where there's been a tamping down of the ability of faculty and students to talk about issues of race and sex-based discrimination in their classroom. There's also been a tamping down of the ability in the academy to protest, and we saw this happen in last spring, where people were not allowed to protest regarding what was going on in the Middle East. In addition, on my former campus, I saw this tamping down with students trying to protest around race issues and students trying to protest around not enough faculty being hired to teach courses around race. So all of these ways in which universities are now being censored are a shrinking of our civic spaces because universities have been powerful ways in which to spread knowledge and discussion. In addition, another thing that the American Civil Liberties Union points out is the abandoning of civil rights enforcement on behalf of historically marginalized groups. And we're beginning to see that in a lot of different ways where they've actually said that they're weakening protections in the area of housing, education, healthcare, and other essential resources by narrowing the availability of impact liability. And so major government agencies at the federal level have been told to stop investigating these things. In addition to this, there has been attempts to marshal the federal power to ramp up right-wing attacks on equal opportunity initiatives. What does this mean? So, while we've seen it in the military, in two instances where trans people are supposedly not going to be allowed to serve anymore, openly trans people. There has been conversations with the new defense secretary that women should not be in leadership positions in the military. They're going to eliminate federal minority contracting programs and other such programs that have been put into place to make sure that there's opportunity for people of color and women to be in these positions. And then obviously there's strict enforcement of immigration laws, and nonprofit organizations who are aiding immigrants will now face challenges because their funding will be limited. They may be exposed to penalties if the administration perceives them as doing something illegal with the populations they serve. As I said a few minutes earlier with USAID, abolishing this hurts multiple U.S. priorities. First of all, there's gender, economic prosperity, and health initiatives that are going to suffer under a USAID shutdown. USAID's sudden shutdown is a warning shot for the U.S. Department of Education, which the government also wants to close. I don't have time to go into this here, but there has been an alarming movement towards privatizing public education in this country, and the use of voucher systems and charter schools. The reason why I say it's alarming is public education has been the space in which we promote civic education and the civic space. And if we privatize that, we lose that as well. The balancing of short-term goals through the shutdown of USAID is going to change the trajectory of our long-term global leadership in international aid. There's been suggestions by many that when we move out other countries will move in, such as China or Russia. But most importantly to me are the lives of vulnerable children around the world that will be at risk because of the shutdown of USAID, most specifically the PEPFAR program in Africa, which for every day that the children don't get the parents, excuse me, pregnant women do not get their HIV medication, 216 children will become infected by their moms in utero. 216 a day. Really important to think about that. Finally, and I don't know if you've all heard about this, but HR 9495, which was proposed last November, it's legislation under the guise of stopping terror financing and tax penalties on American Hostages Act. It gives the Treasury Secretary the power to revoke any 501c3 status if they feel that they're doing something that is terror related. This would run counter to due process for nonprofit organizations. It would put racial justice organizations, civil rights groups, protesters at risk. It would put nonprofit organizations at risk. It's kind of a scare tactic to scare you away from doing more advocacy work and social change and transformation work, because the nonprofit communities that are supporting marginalized people could have their 501c3 status revoked. And one of the things that the independent sector has said is that the ways that they're going to revoke this is by placing the burden of proof on the accused organizations and giving only 90 days for them to demonstrate their innocence before they revoke their tax exempt status. And so this could have a chilling effect on nonprofits who serve marginalized people, and could also have a chilling effect on nonprofits getting involved in advocacy and public policy work. So what steps can you take now as nonprofit organizations? And this is from the Common Great. First of all, diversify your revenue streams, build financial reserves, and strengthen your financial management so that you will be able to respond if anybody tries to come in and tell you that you are not financially solvent. You need to strengthen your advocacy and mobilize grassroots support, both for your organizations, but also for the communities that you serve. And you need to work with your elected officials at the local, state, and federal level to talk about the importance of nonprofit organizations and the work that's done in the community. The other thing that you need to do is you need to enhance with your donors, engage with your donors to enhance their retention. Because when there is a cutback that's coming, very, very briefly, the gist of what the federal government, the current administration is going to do is they want to cut the $7 trillion budget by $2 trillion. The only way to do that, if you hold Social Security, Medicare, the debt payments, and the defense harmless, is to cut almost everything else that the federal government does. Because to save $2 trillion is almost a third of the budget, which then means that those nonprofit organizations, those state governments, those local governments that were depending upon this money from the federal government are now going to be scrambling to find replacements. So one thing you need to do is you need to engage with your current donors so that they will retain you while this is going on. Despite what I said, you need to invest in a strong digital presence for your nonprofit organization so that you can get the word out about what you're doing. You need to be prepared for policy shifts and evaluate contingency plans when programs are cut, when your funding is cut, about how you're going to continue to serve your community. And that also involves your engaging with your local and state leaders around the importance of the work that you do. And then finally, you have to cultivate strong community relations with your nonprofit organization, with your communities that you serve, so that they can be mobilized and ready to respond to anything that happens, any kind of change in policy, any kind of shutdown that comes from the federal government. So, with that being said, we have time for questions.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Mirabella. So if it's okay, I'll read out. Probably have time for about two questions here. So the
Okay.
first one is, can you talk more about how the distinction between management and leadership might help nonprofits prepare and push back on some of the threats that you've identified in this presentation?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you for that question. Because I talk about this with a lot with my students, and I talk about this with a lot with the community organization. So when you become a nonprofit manager, when you become a CEO or a program director, you spend a lot of your time managing things, managing programs, making sure your budget's in place, making sure that the board is functioning properly. It's all related to what's going on internally to the organization. Organizations are important, but our goal is not to keep our organization solvent. Our goal is to keep communities healthy. And that's where we turn to leadership. And so you need to manage your organization, right? You need to know how to do fundraising. You need to make sure that you're doing good financial management. But you also need to be out there visible to your communities and leading your communities so that they will remain strong. Because your organization is not worth much if it's not helping your community become strong. And that's where leadership comes in. And I know at the end of the day, as nonprofit leaders, and I've been a nonprofit leader, I've been a government leader, at the end of the day, we stop and say, oh, I forgot to do that advocacy work, or oh, I didn't have time for that public policy work. We have to prioritize that work. We have to figure out a way to do the other stuff that's important for running our organization, but we have to be prepared to lead communities, particularly as civic spaces are coming under attack. We have to be there as nonprofit organization to pick up that slack. I hope that helped answer your question.
That was wonderful. Thank you so much for that. So another question, I think kind of maybe building a little bit on your points about HR 9495,
Yeah,
and kind of drilling down on it. And this is something that I think we've heard quite a bit, especially over the last couple of weeks, just with a lot of
yeah,
our partners and
yeah,
constituencies.
yeah.
Are we expecting the revocation of nonprofit IRS status for organizations with missions that may be deemed criminal or terrorist, such as anti-racist work? Um,
Boy, I wish I had a positive answer. Um, and this is why it's really, really important to be involved in leading in civic spaces because we have to look at Texas and Florida as cautionary tales. Because what's happening there over the past 4 or 5 years, it nonprofit organizations who work with marginalized communities, such as people of color who are doing DEI work, who are doing immigration work, they've lost funding. Faculty who teach these things have been told you cannot teach these things. Our accrediting body, which has DEI as a big component of this, has told you can't use DEI to accredit your organizations anymore. So what do we do? The thing that we do is we have to, the only thing that we could do, because we don't have that national power, but we do have local power and we do have community power, and we have to be prepared to fight back collectively. And this is an important, I'm reading a lot about this lately, that we can't just be in our little organization, and I'm not suggesting they're little, they're important. We need to work collaboratively across organizations. And when we find out that one organization is being threatened because of the work that they're doing with migrants, other organizations have to step up. So we can't continue to function in our silos. We're so used to siloing, we're the immigration folks, we're the reentry folks, we're the education folks. No, we have to figure out cross-sector collaboration so that when a threat happens to one of us, we have to take it as a threat has happened to all of us. And I think that's where your leadership is going to be so important. And that's kind of what they're talking about right now is how do we as a nation try to address some of these things that are happening right now nationally is by coming together and not just focusing on our own little piece of the world. We have to be there for everybody. Yeah.
Wonderful. And I think with that, we're gonna have to transition to the next period of our session
Okay.
today. But I want to say thank you so much, Dr. Mirabella. Really appreciate your thoughts, your expertise, and your sharing just in terms of just like the reality of the situation that many of us are in currently with not only our communities, but our organizations as well. So with that, we are going to quickly roll over into our video previews for our upcoming workshops. And our first one is going to be on March 5th with Youssef Garcia and Leading with Values, Purpose, and Restoration. So this is going to be a workshop that more conversational in style, but an opportunity for leaders to really dive in. What does it look like to, what is value creation, value establishment, and also seeding that throughout your organization also involve? So if Evelina, if we could start that video now, that would be great. Evelina, I'm not hearing the sound on this video.
I'm trying to share the sound. I don't know why it doesn't work now, but let me see.
Thank you, Evelina. Apologies, everyone. Please bear with us as we deal with these technical difficulties. I will maybe do some of my closing remarks here now as well as we figure out just with the video sound. So just as a quick FYI, as you leave the session today, you will be given an opportunity for a survey for Axelson for the session. We deeply, deeply value your feedback. It's extremely meaningful, not only for like current programming, future programming. So please just it should take about 1 minute. Please fill out the survey as you exit the session today. Okay. I'm still not able to hear the sound on this.
Oh, you still not hear it?
We could try one more time. Apologies again.
Yeah. I don't know why it doesn't work now. It worked before.
Yeah, maybe if we could move on to the next video to see if that works. If we could do Alicia Harley's. So Alicia's so we have 4 videos for y'all today. Alicia Harley's would be on March 12th on project management essentials for social impact. We will try this one. And if this video does not work, my deep apologies, everyone. Then we will be providing these videos later and afterwards. Apologies with these technical difficulties.
Let me know if it works now.
Okay.
Do you work in the social impact sector and want to maximize your project's effectiveness? Then this workshop is for you. Join us for Project Management Essentials for Social Impact, where you'll gain practical tools and strategies to achieve your organization's goals. In this interactive 60-minute session, you'll learn the fundamentals of project management, because this workshop is perfect for emerging leaders in the social impact sector, including program officers, grant managers, and project coordinators. Individuals seeking to enhance their project management skills. Professionals looking to gain a foundational understanding of project management principles specific to the nonprofit context. We'll do 2 interactive exercises. The first one is reverse engineering, where you'll imagine a project that has failed and work backward to identify potential causes. Second is PACT, P-A-C-T goal setting exercise, where you'll learn how to set purposeful, actionable, continuous, and trackable objectives. And by the end of this workshop, you'll be able to confidently plan and execute your projects, set clear, actionable goals, measure your project's impact, improve your decision making, and ultimately achieve your organization's goals. So don't miss out on this opportunity to enhance your project management skills and make a greater impact. Visit the Axelson Center for Nonprofit Management online to learn more and to register for the workshop. We look forward to seeing you there. Thank you.
Wonderful. So again, that session is on March 12th with Alicia Farley on project management essentials. So our next workshop for this upcoming season is with Judy Caribou and Greg Peterson on March 19th. This is the power of collaborative leadership in nonprofits, strengthening the senior leadership and board relationship. Another session that we're extremely excited about.
The complexities are enormous between constantly changing funding compliance, requirements, and constantly changing funding streams and shrinking funding streams in a competitive labor market. There's just one challenge after another on top of that leadership position just being so lonely.
It's nothing but challenges, and having been in the field for 30 years, there's always a new, fresh set of things that feel impossible. And then you look back and you realize those were the good old days. And it's like, oh my God, like, get all the way out. One of the things I feel lucky about with the work we get to do is investing the time in what are we trying to do strategically? How do we focus on the business and just carve out a little bit of time? I mean, the fires are always going to be there for all of us, but how do we work on the business to try to, add some longer term value while we fight all the fires?
Well, and that's why I'm really excited about this workshop that we'll be presenting together, the power of collaborative leadership in nonprofits, because it is carving out that time to be able to work on the business. And so it's going to be this series of reflective activities, thought-provoking exercises, videos, images, actionable insights, all of these things that leaders can walk away with and actually implement immediately after the workshop series.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I cannot wait. I hope everybody is able to make the time to invest in our fun series, and we look forward to seeing you there.
Wonderful. And for the final preview that we have for our spring workshop series, this is with Charles Kamek and Anthony Bolden. Their session is going to be Connecting People and Purpose, Rethinking Employee Engagement in Mission-Driven Organizations. And this will be on April 2nd.
My name is Anthony Bolden.
And I'm Charles Kamek.
And we are the co-founders of Bridgework. And we're so excited to have the opportunity to share with you this spring. See, at Bridgework, our work is all about helping change the world of work for the people who change the world. What does that mean? That means we are trying to help organizations retain their people, their most valuable asset. We want people to think about work differently. So this spring, we want to encourage you to come out and engage with us during our session.
In our session, we'll give away tools and examples of ways in which you can engage with your employees in a different way, a more unique way, one that allows you to invest in them so that they will invest in the goals that you have as well. Here's a quick example. I heard an executive talk about the fact that he was no longer doing one-on-ones, didn't believe in them. And I thought about the fact that there's a bridge work, there's a tension there, because it's a necessity for you to understand not only where your employees are, but also where they're wanting to go professionally. So their personal pursuits, the things that they're navigating at home, their responsibilities, but ultimately where they want to go from a professional standpoint in terms of their ambition. Those are just a small tidbit, a small window into the tools that we want to give you this spring.
So join us, register for the class, and we can't wait to engage with you and build new connections and relationships together. See you there.
Wonderful. And with that, that is the previews for our spring workshop season. So we will provide a link to Yusuf's video in communication after this session. Apologies again for the technical difficulties. And again, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. We hope to see you all at these upcoming sessions. And just as a reminder, this next one is with Yusuf Garcia on March 5th. We also want to thank Dr. Mirabella for her insights and expertise today. And before you leave, please do be sure to click on the evaluation link that will happen as we close the session. We deeply appreciate it, and it is meaningful to us. Take care, and hope to see you later in our workshop season. Thanks so much, everyone.